Tonight's guest is Trevor. Trevor, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time. Trevor, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm 25 years old. I grew up in Illinois. I grew up around nature. I was in Boy Scouts. I like nature and wildlife, so I've done my hunting and fishing.
You just said that you like nature and wildlife. After you had those bad Dogman encounters you're going to tell us about tonight, do you still have that appreciation for nature and wildlife, or do you try to avoid the woods at all costs?
Vic, I still have the appreciation for nature and being out in the woods. I won't be out in the woods by myself, but I will go out in the woods and fish at night and stuff like that.
I can understand why you would want to be in the woods alone after the encounters you're going to talk about tonight. That's totally understandable. We're here to talk about all the Dogman encounters you've had, but they're not the only creepy things you've had encounters with. Please talk us through that.
Vic, most of my grandparents' houses, they had the old 1850s, the old Civil War aged or older houses. So there's been some fair share of paranormal stuff that I've dealt with. Ghosts and demons, hearing disembodied voices and stuff.
Considering the fact you've had demon encounters, ghost encounters, and of course Dogman encounters, do you think the encounters with demons and ghosts are easier to deal with or more difficult to deal with than your Dogman encounters?
For demon and Dogman encounters that I've had, I would say those two are actually harder to deal with than actual spirits, because ghosts and spirits, they're kind of, if you think of it, they're probably deceased humans. So it's more easy to comprehend this is what a wandering soul or somebody who hasn't been able to pass on to the afterlife.
I figured your encounters with spirits would be a lot easier to deal with, but the ones with demons, I wasn't really sure if those were worse or easier to deal with than the Dogman encounters you've had.
Well, the demon encounters I've had, I've almost been possessed by these demons. So it takes a certain amount of willpower not to be possessed.
Well, that's frightening. Sorry to hear that. You had a lot of trouble sharing your Dogman encounters with me the first time around. How much trouble have you had functioning after having those encounters, Trevor?
Well, I grew up in a family that's full of Christians, and they didn't necessarily believe in like the paranormal or anything that science or religion couldn't explain. So I couldn't really turn to my family or friends because a lot of them would say, oh, it's nonsense, you're crazy, or if you try to talk about it again, we're going to lock you up, put you in a straitjacket or whatnot.
Really is a shame it has to be that way, but it's not just you. A lot of eyewitnesses have experienced that. Really is a shame. After being so strongly affected by your encounters, what's been the most extreme thing you've done to try to come to terms with them?
The most extreme, I would say, it seems like we're dealing with any kind of trauma. It seems like a lot of people go to alcohol and drugs, and that's kind of the route I went to cope with everything, as self-medicate, to try to outrun the problems.
Wow, well, it goes without saying, I'm so sorry to hear that you had to resort to that to try to come to terms with them. How much has your ability to do normal things been compromised?
I used to be able to go out in the woods and fish and go hiking and camping by myself, and I can't do that no more. I've experienced them more by myself than with other people. So, like the old saying goes, safety in numbers.
It goes without saying, I sure hope that someday soon you're able to head back into the woods without any trouble and have a great time the way you used to at one point. But time will tell. Why do you think it is that you've had so many encounters with Dogman, Trevor?
I don't know. I'm either very lucky or very unlucky, Vic. I really can't answer that one because It's one of those things that's like asking why I've had so many encounters with, ghosts and demons. It's one of those things that it's hard to explain because it's like you never know when this stuff will happen to you. It just, a lot of times it just happens out of nowhere.
I think I know the answer to that question. Some people are just magnets for these things, and I think that's what you are. You must be a magnet, and they're drawn to you for whatever reason, unfortunately. If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. Besides me, the only other people you've shared your encounters with, until now that is, have been 2 friends of yours. How'd they respond when you told them?
Well, Vic, they're both girls. I've known them for at least 15 years. And one of them actually lives in a haunted house and has spirits and stuff. And they know me as the type of person, I'm not a jumpy type of person. I'm not a skittish person by nature. And the fact that I refuse to talk about my encounters with demons and dogmen compared to like talking about my experiences with spirits, they know that it messed me up.
Well, yeah, when you have the experiences that you're going to tell us about tonight, that's going to mess pretty much anyone up. Yeah, they're really intense. Speaking of that, Trevor, please tell us about them now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
I grew up in a little small village on the Mississippi, and it's called Elsa. And there was like a subdivision up on the bluffs. There was like this big, long, windy road going up the hill. It was surrounded by farmlands and woods and the bluffs. But the college that is in actual Elsa itself owns a lot of that property, the bluffs and the stuff, for whatever courses they may have. I don't know, because it's a kind of a Christian college. So I lived up in the little subdivision above Elsa. So there's like several different roads, a lot of them dead-ended or had little turnabouts where you could go down and then turn around and go back up the road. I lived on one of those said roads. We had woods and stuff on the backside, but we had enough of like a clearing for like a backyard. And we had the basements were kind of built into like the bluffs, and then you had like the sliding glass door where it opened up into the backyard, and then you had like the upstairs where you would have your main floor that you would come in that had like the living room, the extra bedrooms, and the kitchen and a bathroom. And then there was another sliding glass door that went onto like a wooden deck. And the front of the house, it had like a overhang with poles, so it was kind of like an awning, and it had a concrete base. And we had like 2 dogs that had plastic dog houses. They sat underneath where my bedroom window would be. Not exactly under it, but like kind of off to the side to where I could look out my window during the day and look out and see them. And this was late February, early March of 2004. These houses are no longer there. But we had an abandoned house that sat on the left side of our house. On the right side, there was another family that lived there on the other side, and their whole yard was fenced in with privacy fences. And then on the other side of that abandoned house was a summer home. There was people that lived there during the summer but would be gone for the fall and the spring and winter, and then come up late spring, early summer. And then we had a house across the street that had a white, like the old farm picket fences. And then the road would go down, and there was like a turnabout, and that turnabout was in the middle of the woods. It was compassed by woods on all sides. But growing up, we would go and we would watch coyotes and deer in our backyard from the basement looking out the glass window. So I seen a lot of wildlife up close, but behind a kind of like a zoo, my own little personal zoo. But they got to free roam. They got to leave whenever they wanted. So my mom and my sister's biological dad, they slept in the basement. Me and my sister slept upstairs. My room was on the far left and my sister's room was on the far right. Both of our windows had the big glass windows that had like glass on the inside, a screen in the middle, and then a glass on the outside. And then on the sides had the little basement windows on the sides of the rooms. So you had like a little slit where you can still look out and see, but it wasn't like a big window. You know, as a little kid, I had to stand up on my bed and whatnot just to be able to look out the window. I don't exactly remember the day or what the weather was like, so I can't give you the accurate details of that. My parents would put me and my sister to bed around 8:30, 9 o'clock. I would still be up for at least an hour or two, because I had difficult sleeping even as a kid before my encounters. My bed sat underneath the little slit window in my bedroom, and I laid and faced the wall all the time and would listen to my dogs from outside scurry around looking, because they would kill rattlesnakes that would come up into the yard at night or whatnot and kill them. So I didn't hear them this night. To me it was weird, so I was like, because I would fall asleep listening to that, as well as the sounds of nature, because my little tiny window above my bed, it would be cracked during this late winter, early spring to let in fresh air. So I'm 6 years old. I was facing the wall like I normally always did to go to bed. And then I would listen to nature and whatnot. I didn't hear nothing, which was weird because, you know, I'm so used to hearing all the noises, and not hear any of it was kind of scary as a kid. So I roll over onto my back and looked out the window. I had like a thin curtain where you could still see through it from the outside in, and then vice versa. So I rolled over, kind of had my head propped up on the pillow, looking out the window. I see, when I first saw it, I thought it was one of my dogs in the window. And then I kept looking at it, and I noticed it wasn't one of my dogs, because it was way too big to be one of my dogs. And it had like the face, like the classic wolf face with like the Doberman or dog ears up top of their head. They were perked up, looked like little arrows pointing up towards the sky. The eyes were like a yellowish, kind of like a red, because give me a second, Vic.
You're doing fine. Take your time.
Sorry, I started feeling sick to my stomach talking about it.
Oh, no, I understand. There's no rush. Please do take your time.
It had like the classic Timberwolf face and like the classic Doberman pointed ears for its head. And it had like the yellowish red eyes just staring back at me. And it kind of was standing up on its hind legs. It had one hand completely down, like kind of off to its side a little bit out in front of it. But it was the one hand was like it was you couldn't see it from where I was at, but you could see it kind of looked like overgrown raccoon hands or paws, but it had like 4 long fingers with like dagger-like claws. I would say they were probably every bit of 6 to 7 inches long. The claws were, and the fingers, you could have easily put a size 15 ring on its fingers, give or take. It had its hand pressed up against the outer glass pane, kind of just barely touching it. It was black as night. It was. I didn't really pay attention too much to its teeth. I was just trying to wrap my head around the fact that how big it was, because it was massive. It made my parents look small, and my parents are like 5 foot to maybe 6 foot tall. So it was taller than them. Had the bodybuilder upper torso, like take what Rock looks like today, the wrestler, or Hulk Hogan. It had the massive upper chest and everything. It just the upper body was just massive. If I had to guess, it was probably every bit of in between 6 and 7 feet tall. Because I didn't see the waist down, I saw the waist up because of how the window sat. It was massive. The hair on its arms and all over its body was black. It was as black as freshly brewed coffee black. It stood there and stared at me for, I would say, a good 5 or 10 minutes or so. It must have put too much pressure on the glass where it had its hand, because the glass broke. It was so it happened so quick. It was like he accidentally put too much pressure and then disappeared after it broke. It like startled him, and that's when the nature sounds came back after he disappeared. We had like an 8-foot privacy fence in front, so it literally had the vertical jump to clear that 8-foot fence and disappear. This next encounter happened in between Jerseyville and Shipman. My mom's now second husband. They got married that year in June, and it was in 2009. So I spent a lot of time out at my stepdad's mom's house, who had an old farmhouse. They had probably every bit of 8 acres or so of land. And it was like kind of hilly, but not too hilly to where it was like, it was hilly enough where if you went down the hill and went up the hill, you got a nice, decent workout walking up and down these hills. Where the road sat, there was a field across from my step-grandmother's house. Had corn. They just harvested it. And then there was, I would say, about 100 yards from where the house, in like a straight line, was like the big pole barn tool shed that had all their big mowers and stuff for farming, because they farmed hay. And we had like a hay field over near on the back far side of the property, because they used to have hogs too. This was before I was born, is when they had hogs. So they had a hog barn all the way in the very back pretty much nestled in like a kind of a, looked like a perfect sea grove of like trees behind it. It was like nestled perfectly in like the trees, where there was enough space to where you had a clear view around it, but then there was trees. There was two outhouses on the property. There was the one was the old fashioned wooden walls porta potty with like the moon crescent moon in it and the door. And then there was an actual like, the construction porta potties over by the near the house. As well as there was also a bathroom and a shower and stuff in the actual house. I loved spending a lot of time out there because they had blackberry bushes. We had our own garden out there where we grew our own vegetables, so like peas and carrots and so on. They also had an abandoned greenhouse too on the property that was used for storage. But there was at least a good 5-6 acres of woods around the property too. Because my grandmother owned one property, and then the next property over was owned by my step aunt at the time. So we had her property that we could hunt on, as well as my grandmother's property. And me and my stepdad would go out every hunting season on the weekends when I was out of school, and we would go hunting. And this was November 28th, 29th of 09. I was staying out there. I think I was helping my grandmother with helping her out on the property. I don't exactly remember what I was helping her with, but I liked my own privacy, so I would stay in my stepdad's camper, who we would normally stay in anyway during hunting season. So anytime I would stay out there, I would stay out especially if I was by myself out there with my grandmother, I would stay out there in that camper. So I had my own space. And there was two entrances to the property. There was the main drive, and then there was like a little side access where it was a kind of like a farmer access where we could come up with like the four-wheelers or the four-wheel drive vehicles and not really damage the yard any. But my stepdad's camper sat kind of inside the pole barn where it was open, facing that second access point. Because we would take the four-wheelers in and out of that way, mainly. We would take the main vehicles in and out of the main drive. So the house and the pole barn itself sat up on a hill overlooking the road. And it was like the little hitched campers. It was like all contained in one spot. There was really no rooms. It was just like all in one spot. It was like small. The dining table folded down into a bed, and then it had like a bunk beds, and then it had a bathroom, but the bathroom was, I don't know exactly what was wrong with it, but the bathroom didn't work. It was basically where we stored the bows and the guns for when we went hunting. And then we had our hunting clothes up above where my stepdad would sleep on the bottom bunk of that bunk bed set. We would have our hunting clothes up there, and then we had like a little kitchen sink, and then like a kitchen counter thing, and cabinets. And then you had like a little 4 foot by, I would say, 8 little cubby hole where you could stick your boots and stuff, but it went far enough back to where it could fit a good size person if you really wanted to hide under there. And the camper sat about 50 feet away from the outhouse out there. So if you had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you would grab a flashlight off the counter and walk out there, shine your flashlight so you don't trip over anything. So it was dark enough to where I needed a flashlight. Because, like full moons, you can have that light where you can see. So it was dark enough to where it required a flashlight. Like, you couldn't see more than, like, maybe your arm length in front of you without any light. But you could see shadows off in the distance or whatnot. Because that road was kind of well lit because of the farmers. So I just took my medicine. I was getting all ready to go to bed and everything. I needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed the flashlight and I walked out and I went to the outhouse to go to the bathroom and do my business. And then as I was coming back, because I had the flashlight pointed down enough to where I could see, like, in front of my feet, a good 15, 20 feet ahead of my feet. So I got about 10, 15 feet away from the camper door. And I seen something weird off in the distance, across the road near the cornfield. It's already been harvested, so seeing coyotes and deer was normal to see out there. But this, it looked from a distance, the shape of the shadow, it looked like a overgrown hyena jacked up on steroids. It had like the dog like hind legs, and then it kind of went up, had like the little hump in the back, and then it had its arms that were like extremely long in the front, and it had the elongated wolf face. This one didn't have like the Doberman pincher ears. It had like kind of like the ears were kind of, they looked kind of flopped a little bit, like they were, I don't know how to describe it. It kind of looked like, you know how some dogs have like the little flops on their little tops, like it kind of, that's what it kind of looked like. It had like the ears kind of flopped over, like, you know, you would see on like beagles and little wire hair terriers. But it wasn't like pronounced, like it covered the whole ear. It was just like just right at the tips where it just kind of flopped over just enough to where it was noticeable. Not realizing it, I brought the flashlight up because I was curious to see what I was looking at. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, and my imagination was going wild. You know how kids are with being scared of the dark and whatnot. So I brought the light up, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I brought it up just enough to catch its eyes, and I saw the eye glow on it was like a red, like a pale red-ish color. And that's when it stopped moving. And then it turned its head and faced me. And that's when I got a good look at its face. It was like the canines were, the top canines and the bottom canines kind of overlapped a little bit. And they're every bit of probably as long as my adult fingers. They were massive. Massive teeth. And massive canines. The canines are what, in the eyes and its just general appearance, stood out. It was big. Like I said, it looked like a hyena on like it's done steroids since it was a puppy in the womb. It kept looking at me. It never moved its head to take its eyes away from me. And it stood up, and it sounded like bones breaking or like knuckles cracking as it's standing up. And you could hear it having difficulty. Like, it sounded like it was having problems breathing because it could, even though it knows that it can do it, it's like the weight on its chest and everything was not meant to be like that. And I was still like, had the flashlight on it, staring at it. And I saw its arms were massive. It had like the raccoon hands, it looked like, from a distance. And claws that are every bit of 5-6 inches long or more. And then when it finally stood all the way up, it was every bit of 8-9 feet tall. And its head never moved. It kept both its eyes fixated on me. And then it rotated its body to align with it, to face me. As soon as it turned and its body was facing me, I don't know if I dropped the flashlight, what I did. All I know is as soon as it turned, I was already running as quickly as I could into the camper. And I locked that camper door and grabbed my black blanket and I crawled in that little 4x8 space, thinking I was trying to hide from it. And all I hear is boom, boom, boom. It was running up that hill like it was nothing. And it came around to that camper door and it was trying to open that camper door. And it was shaking the whole camper. And it would do this for a good 2 minutes. It would try to shake the camper door and try shaking it open and everything. And then it would walk into the window where I would normally sleep on, where that dining room table sat that felt breathe. But it was trying to open the door, but it would shake the whole camper. And then it would do that for 2 minutes, and then walk over to the window that overhung where my bed would be, where usually the dining table would be in this camper, but it was folded down for me to have a bed. It would look in the window frantically. You heard it was like a low growl. It was like it would look in the window, and then it would go look in the other windows, and then run. It'll go back to the camper door and start trying to open the door again, and just shaking the camper while it's doing it. It did this most of the night until about early morning. And about 3:30, 4 o'clock comes around. It finally lets out this guttural, blood-curdling, woman demonic scream or howl or whatever. It sounded like it came from the Exorcist movies. And then all you could hear in the distance, after it let out that, it was boom, 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 and back into the woods and disappeared. I didn't hear it. I heard it run off into the woods and disappear. But when I was looking at it before I dipped and went into the camper, it kind of had it was like a bodybuilder's upper body. And it kind of looked like it had its tail curled up underneath, covering its genitalia or whatever. It was curled up underneath. And the smell was awful. It sounded it smelled like when you shoot a deer in the gut and it dies and you go to gut it. It smelled like that, but 10 times worse. It smelled like rotting animal that's been out in the sun for 10 days. So, my third encounter happened when I was with a buddy of mine. He was coming to Jerseyville to pick me up. He lived in Campsville, so we did our little road trip where we talked about personal stuff, and he would ask me for advice on some things and vice versa. And his car was it was like a little Chevy car. It was red. It had 4 doors and it had a back seat with a baby seat in the back. Because at the time, the girl he was with had a baby, so he had a baby seat in the back. And he lived in Calhoun County. So we would go take these back roads to go up towards Eldred and over to the Campsville Ferry. That would take us across the Mississippi. I think it's either the Mississippi or the Illinois River. I could be either one. I don't know. I think it might have been the Illinois River, but I could be wrong. I don't know. It's been a while since I've been over in there. Anyway, it was like kind of in the middle of the night, and I would go stay with him and his girl for a week or two, and I would help out around and help work on the cars and whatnot. So we're driving these not really dirt road country roads. They were like little paved highways. It was like a little 2-lane highway with little white dashes, or the white lines on the sides, and then the yellow dashes in the middle, and they had the little reflectors or whatever you want to call them in the middle of those little yellow dashes. We were in between Eldred and the ferry, and the light post only lit up where they had roads connected, so there was only light post on roads that would cross section or tee off going in either left or right, and those could be every bit of 2 miles, 5 miles apart from each other. And there was a couple little odd businesses here and there, but most of it was all fields. There was like little tree lines here and there near like little coverts or little like creeks or whatever you want to call them. But that was about it for any like tree lines until you got closer to the river, and that's where the woods would be. So most of it all was basically just fields of corn and soy. But me and my buddy he was driving, and we were in between the ferry and Eldred in Greene County. So we were somewhere in between, and this was like June 10th, so it's summer. So we had the windows up, AC on, music going, the normal whatnot that kids do. So about the halfway point between the ferry and Eldred, I see, it looks like off in the distance, hyenas, jacked up steroid like hyenas. And I'd seen it, and I'm like, hey bud, can we stop? My buddy stopped the car, and I said, look out my window. And he looks out my window. It looked like he lost his soul. His face went white as a pearl, or white as a ghost. And he goes, what in the freaking heck is that? I said, I don't know. Right after I said that, it almost seemed like they were reading our minds or whatever. They all four stopped. Because I didn't know how many there were when I seen them. But when they stopped, I saw there was 4 of them. And they all stood up on their hind legs. I didn't get a real good look at them because it was dark and they were often a good ways away from the road. But from what I could see, they had like the classic dog face or wolf-looking face with Doberman pincher ears on the top of their heads. 2 of them were like every bit of, I'm guessing here, 8-9 feet tall, I'm guessing. And then the second group were probably 5-6 foot tall. And I couldn't really tell I just know that they were massive. And as soon as they stopped and stood up, my buddy just flips it into drive and hits the gas pedal. He went pedal to the metal. We were gone. We were about, I would say, because where we stopped was underneath like a street light. Because there was like a road that went off to our right on the driver's side. So after we saw them stand up, and before they had those thing from a distance had a chance to react or come towards the vehicle, we were already gunning it. And then I don't know if it's like was the pack leader or the leader of the hunt or whatever you want to call the thing. After we were about 100, I would say 150 yards away from, give or take, I'm guessing, away from this light pole, this thing darts up and stands underneath the light pole, watching us leave. I don't know if it was making sure we didn't turn around and come back, making sure we were gone. I'm not sure. But when it got underneath the light, I could see it had like the classic dog legs. And then it had it looked like a tail or whatnot, tucked up and underneath, like where behind and General Talia would be. And it was black. I don't know what the other color of the other three in the pack were, or whatever they were doing. I don't know. They were probably hunting deer, because I seen deer before I seen them. So they were probably hunting. But it was black. It kind of had like matted fur like on its arms, and it had like the classic raccoon hands with the long nails that looked like black daggers. Classic dog legs, had the upper body of like a bodybuilder on steroids. Its eyes were like kind of like a goldish color. But that's about all I can remember for detail wise from seeing this thing. Because my buddy refused to stay around and find out, which I don't blame him. But when me and him got to his house, I tried talking to him about it, and he refused to talk about it. He's like, it was just a figment of our imagination. And he was just making every excuse and every way of dismissing it, because he didn't want to talk about it, which I quit crying. So this was right after my third encounter. And my third encounter happened June 10th of 2015. But this was June 20th. My buddy's girlfriend, her daughter was sick, and we needed to go to the hospital and get her checked out and everything. But my buddy had to work that next day, but she didn't like driving alone. Especially at night with a kid, I volunteered to go, because I had to stop by my house in Jerseyville anyway and get some, I think, clothes, because I was going to do something or help them do something that day. I don't remember what. So she was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and then she had her daughter in the car seat behind the driver's seat. And it was the little red car, little Chevrolet car with 4 doors and so on. Same car from third encounter. So we're probably at I would guess, the halfway mark between Hardin and Campsville. this road was not as well lit. So the only light you really had was the occasional house, and that could vary from 2 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles apart from each other. So you didn't really have the light from the houses to light up the road on some of these parts, except for the headlights of your car. And it happened to be on one of those stretches where it had like the incline, had the guardrail on the riverside, and then it had like a rocky thing. We were driving. I had my window cracked because I was smoking a cigarette. I didn't notice at first the silence, because me and her were talking, and the baby was asleep. So me and her were talking, and then as we were coming up the road, there was a house coming up about, I would say, good mile, 2 miles up from where we were. And they had a street light on their driveway, but there was still like a good, 90-degree incline or so going down towards the river. As we're coming up to this house, we see, it looked like 4 shadows of like these giant bodybuilding builders, like standing in the road. She thought they were people at first. But as we got closer, I would say the front end of the car from these things, when we stopped, was every bit of 10 feet away from them. So the front of the car was 10 feet away from these things. And these things were like standing kind of in a line facing towards where we're coming from. Like they already knew we were coming. And that's when I got the smell of rot. And it's coming through the AC vents, like when you go over a dead skunk. It's coming through the AC vents. It was coming through the cracked window. She turned white as a ghost. And I was trying to stay calm because I just had I don't know, I weirdly decided to be, like, I don't know, I was, with having her and then the baby in the car, I just instinctively figured one of us needs to be calm in this situation. Even though I was terrified beyond all reason. But they all were standing in like a perfect line crossing this road, facing towards us. They had the wolf, like a timber wolf face, and then it had like the ears of Doberman pinchers on top of their heads. One was 10 foot, 11 foot tall. Then the next one was slightly smaller in build, like it looked like kind of like a female build. And this would be the second biggest one, sat about a little bit shorter than the first one. I would say maybe 9 foot tall, 8 foot tall. It could have been bigger, it could have been smaller. I don't know. And then they had 2 smaller ones that were about 6. I would say they were more like 7 foot tall. And they were pretty big, like an actual male bodybuilder big. The 2 smaller ones, they were kind of like a brownish black color. They weren't as like matted as the 2 bigger ones, with like the caked dried blood and stuff on their fur, and their teeth were more white, like pearly white. And they had the same wolf dog-like face with the Doberman pinscher ears. they had it looked like their tails tucked up and underneath, covering like their genitalia, but they weren't like bushy. They were kind of like, they looked like a normal like dog tail that you would like see on like a wire-haired terrier, or just by the poof of it, of the tail. And then they had like, the classic dog or cat-like legs on the bottom halves. And then they had like, they looked more like you would think like your classical werewolves like from Skyrim or Van Helsing, based on size and appearance. And then the bigger ones looked, I think it was a female. I am not 100% sure, because as a nature lover, there's a lot of species where the females tend to be smaller than the males or whatnot. But it looked like it had more of a like feminine animal size, because it wasn't like as big as the male. I would say it was like about half the size of the big male, and it had a big kind of black bushy tail, and it had like the matted blood caked to its like forearms, and they all had raccoon hands with dagger long. I would say they were probably 7-8 inches long, the claws, and then the fingers were, looked like giant raccoon hands. And like I said, it had more of like a feminine body build, like the female bodybuilder look, just kind of a little bit bigger than your average female bodybuilders. And the arms on these things could reach out and literally, like, at least on the bigger ones, if they wanted to grab the car, they could, because they had long enough arms to grab the front bumper and pull the front bumper of this car and hold the car. And the little ones, I would say, probably had half the arm length. And then the bigger one, it was a male, because it was not afraid to show off its genitalia. I'm not going to go into details, but it was big. It was massive, as well as it being massive in general, body-wise. And the bigger ones had more of like a darker black with the matted blood and visceral on their face and their arms and hands. I would say it was about a minute or two before I didn't take my eyes off of it, but I said to my friend, we need to reverse and get out of here. But it felt like an eternity. She starts crying hysterically, freaking out. I'm like trying to be calm, because now the baby's starting to wake up because of the sound and her mom freaking out. And I'm telling her, breathe, let's get out of here, we'll figure it out. Let's go back to Campsville, and we'll just take the long way to Jerseyville, to the Jerseyville hospital. She puts it in reverse. She's still crying hysterically, but she's managing to like not. She's like wiping her face and was reversing, and I was trying to help guide her back so we didn't go off the road. We managed to get to like a little turnabout that's on the left-hand side. There was like a little gravel like turnabout or parking spot for like eagle watchers or whatever. We managed to get there and turn around and start heading back towards Campsville. as soon as we started going towards Campsville, they got on all fours and started like escorting us out of there. Kind of like you would with if you were on your way to the hospital and you couldn't wait for an ambulance and your wife was pregnant. They were kind of giving us like a police escort out of there. Like there was something else there that they didn't want us involved in or whatnot. So they followed us for every bit of a mile or two. They never came up to the side of the car. Nothing like that. She's finally calmed down enough to where she's not crying so hysterically. And the baby is waking up and the baby's kind of crying. I'm still trying to hold it together at this point. And I'm trying to calm the baby down now because she needs to focus on the road. And I was telling her, okay, before we get on the ferry, let's stop. Let's collect ourselves and talk. If we have to talk about it, we'll talk about it. If not, so be it. So we managed to get back into Campsville. We pulled off into like where there used to be a bar. There used to be a bar there when this encounter happened, but there's not no more. It's just a little flat park area, and then there's So we pulled off into there, and I finally let out all of my pent out emotions. I started crying hysterically. I've never cried that hard. And the only time I have was when one of my grandparents who I was close to passed away. And that was 4 or 5 years ago before this incident. So I hadn't cried that hard until that night. So we did finally get to compose ourselves. We did what we needed to go do. Ended up she had a real bad flu, her daughter, and we got back and we never talked about it. Except for when we were stopped before we got on the ferry to go finish what we actually originally set out to do. Never was brought up afterwards.